I'm so delighted to introduce our next speaker, Colleen Moore, who is a senior studio manager at Stitch Fix, who is going to speak today about unlocking creativity through inclusive practices, the power of every voice. Love this. Thank you so much. Over to you, Colleen.
Thank you, Joanna. Appreciate the introduction. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining this conversation today. I am Colleen Moore, and I'm super excited to discuss how inclusive practices, how the power of every voice can really unlock creativity and drive business results. So I'm very fortunate to work alongside this talented team pictured right here that brings creative vision and brand identity to life through stunning product imagery. I've had a great career spanning a variety of roles in photo and creative operations in support of so many great brands and so many great teams. So inclusion is something that I'm very passionate about. So let's start with, what is inclusion? Well, it really means actively embracing and valuing diverse perspectives. So just wonder if you can think about, have you ever had a time in your career where you felt really included? Personally, I felt the most included when I felt like I could show up like my authentic self and share my perspective openly. And I really believe that part of being included means that we have to be vulnerable at times. So in the spirit of daring greatly, I'd like to frame up today's talk through the lens of my own personal journey. And yes, there might be some photography puns along the way. Okay, listen, y'all. I'm terrified to be up here, standing on this virtual stage, about to share something so personal with you all. This doesn't come easy to me, and it's definitely not something I take lightly. But I believe in setting examples and facing our fears by being vulnerable. So you see, I have ADHD. Sharing my diagnosis, my ADHD diagnosis, hasn't been easy. Initially, I really viewed my unique working style as like a flaw, something maybe to be fixed. But I realized with my diagnosis that my traits are really an integral part of who I am. It's my identity. You see, the ADHD brain is structurally different from a neurotypical person. So looking back in the early parts of my career, I can see times and pivotal moments where some of these traits, they felt like barriers. But it turned out those same traits are really what propelled me forward and drove me to succeed and think of things in a different way. For example, I remember getting my first job as a producer, and the doubters worried about my organizational skills. They were somewhat valid, but despite the doubts, I learned to really lean on my strengths, which are creative and quick problem solving and hyper focus. And with that, I succeeded. Hyperfocus, for example, is one of my personal ADHD traits that allows me to dive really deep into the details and deliver high pressure projects with a lot of precision and really untangle complex issues. But my story is just one dimension of diversity. Diversity encompasses various visible and invisible dimensions. And all of those dimensions really enrich our teams, and everyone brings their own unique perspectives. So embracing those differences isn't just about us surviving and getting the work done. It's about us thriving. When I began sharing that I have ADHD with teammates and team members, I wasn't sure how it would be received. And I did get a mixed bag of results, but I'll say creating a culture of openness really allowed me to show up authentically, and it taught me the power of making others feel safe to do the same. So diversity in thought is like adjusting the lens of a camera. When you zoom in too far, you might lose sight of the bigger picture. But when you widen the lens to include more perspectives, you're going to capture that full scene. For example, a recent McKinsey study found that companies in the top quartile for ethnic diversity are 36% more likely to outperform their peers in profitability. When we include more voices, we really do unlock that creativity. And that's what we're all here to do, right? Is to make great creative. So I've seen this firsthand. Here's an example. My team was facing a roadblock. We couldn't figure out how to update this process and alleviate those moments. So we opened up the discussion to include voices from upstream and downstream teams. And that collaboration really led to some innovative solutions that none of us would have gotten to on our own. So now I'd like to just take a second and hear from all of you. So I want to take a quick poll. You're going to see the poll in the tab, the poll tab on your screen. And so you're going to need to toggle over there. And I'd like to know what the biggest challenge you face in fostering inclusivity in your team. Take a moment, select your answer. Is it time constraints, lack of resources, fear of making mistakes, resistance to change, something else? There's no judgment here. This is about how we can grow together. Give y'all a second. A little bit of everything, it seems like, so far. All right, y'all. It looks like some of the themes I'm seeing are really fear of making mistakes. Yeah, who doesn't fear making mistakes, right? Especially when it comes to including voices and how you include voices. It's really powerful to see those results. Resistance to change, it's hard. As leaders, we need to find a way to actively make space for everyone's voice. And we are facing challenges. But it's not enough to just value diversity in theory. We've got to find a way to make sure everyone feels safe, respected, and empowered to contribute their thoughts. So I encourage you to figure out how you can crash through those challenges and come up with solutions for your team. And feel free to pop questions in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to give you my suggestions as well. As someone with ADHD, my ability to think quickly and connect seemingly unrelated ideas has often led to creative breakthroughs. So that's a reason why including a range of diverse thought is so important, whether that's from neurodivergent individuals or underrepresented groups. It's very valuable. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about power skills. Okay, power skills, formerly known as soft skills, are like the film in your old 35mm camera. Without that film, nothing is going to develop. In a world where technology is advancing rapidly and automation is on the rise, how many of us talk about AI and technology? Listen, y'all, our human-centric skills are more important than ever now. They are what bring your interactions and relationships into focus, ensuring meaningful connections and fostering that inclusive environment. Research is showing that power skills, or these soft skills like empathy, active listening, and collaboration, play a key role in the ability to foster an inclusive environment. I've got one compelling statistic to share with you all from a Deloitte study, which found that organizations with inclusive cultures are 2.3 times more likely to be innovation leaders in their industry. There's not a person I've talked to recently in my network of connections that isn't getting pressure to innovate and find ways to innovate and stay ahead of the curve. So inclusivity is a no-brainer here. If you want to reach that level of innovation, 2.3 times more than creating an inclusive environment makes all the sense in the world. A McKinsey and Company report also found that companies in the top quartile for diversity are 33% more likely to have higher profitability. So the development of power skills really can help create environments where diverse teams can work together effectively and find ways to contribute their own unique perspectives and feel valued. These are the key ingredients for both inclusion and business success. So I want to take some time to encourage all of you leaders out there who are listening to please use your power to create space for every voice. Inclusive leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating space where others can share their ideas freely. For years, I hesitated to share how my ADHD impacts my own workflow. But once I opened up, I discovered that sharing these unique ways of thinking often led to better solutions and gave space for others to share what would work for them as well. This is really important, especially when you're working in a fast-paced environment like an e-commerce studio. So I want to give you all a few practical ways I think that you could use to foster a more inclusive environment in your studio or within your creative teams. First, think about bringing in outside resources. Invite experts to provide workshops for your team, workshops on inclusivity or creative problem solving. Start that conversation with support. Hire an external consultant and have them audit your production process and offer you some feedback. Where can you improve? Okay, the next one is a big one, psychological safety. It's time we normalize open dialogue during critiques and reviews. For instance, let your team know it's okay. It's okay to flag something when something feels off, even if it's outside of their role or outside of their lane. As someone with ADHD, I've experienced firsthand how empowering it is when a team creates space for different ways of processing and problem solving. And someone on your team might catch something that you might not. So encourage that sharing. It's really the difference between feeling like a contributor versus an outsider. Okay, my last one for y'all is inclusive decision making. We all know we work in a fast-paced environment and we need answers quickly. But take the time when you're reviewing your workflows, maybe when you're updating your style guides, you're troubleshooting bottlenecks. Include everyone. Include your stylists, your photographers, your retouchers, your producers. Their unique perspectives are what can uncover those challenges or opportunities that you might not have seen. For example, ask your retouchers, how are the decisions that are being made on set impacting them downstream? So, with that, I just want to reflect a little bit on today's discussion and challenge each of you. How seriously are you taking inclusivity in your teams? What piece of yourself can you share with those on your team? How can you create a safe space for others? What fault do you have that you can reframe as an opportunity? Inclusive environments aren't just about improving individual experience. They do that, but they also lead to better creative results. And when we're producing hundreds, sometimes thousands of images, sometimes daily, even small shifts in how we work together can have such a massive impact. So I would love for you to each think of one concrete action. What can you do this week to create a more inclusive space? Maybe it's hosting a listening session. Maybe it's rethinking how you solicit feedback. Or maybe it's amplifying the voices of those that are often overlooked. So I want to thank you all so much for being here today and for embracing this important conversation. Before we transition to your questions, I want to leave you with one final thought. Creating an inclusive environment shouldn't be a nice to have. It should be an essential key to unlock creativity, to drive innovation, and ultimately to deliver better results. So the good news is that inclusivity is something that we can all influence, no matter our title or role. It starts with small, intentional actions that make a big difference over time. So with that, I would love to hear from you and answer any questions you have.
Thank you so much, Colleen. I love what you said, small intentional actions. It's like, what is the best next thing that you can do to begin to foster an inclusive, an open team? And I think for everyone that looks a little bit different. So I love your invitation of folks really being intentional about reflecting and thinking about what is just one thing that you can begin to introduce, maybe that you've never done before. How do you even be bold enough to like talk to your teams about your desire and the need for help, even for their ideas. I love that you just gave us some really practical tips for things that we can do just to begin to take action. And I think, as you said, use your power, the power that you have to create space for inclusivity and openness. I think the one thing that kind of threads through here from a couple of the other talks that we've heard today, thinking of the one, Kevin Frank and what he was sharing with us about, is that it is up to us to take a proactive approach, to really like not sit and be reactive, which I think oftentimes we do in response to an issue that arises, or sometimes just an unfortunate example of where we have not been inclusive or open, or you know um, fostering a psychologically safe environment. And so I love that we're talking today about different, very practical ideas and steps that we can walk away and take to begin to improve the teams, the places where we work at an individual level. Whether you're a leader, whether you're a team member, it doesn't matter. Like we each can contribute in a very meaningful way. So I love that. We do have a couple of questions, so I want to make sure to get to those. Um, Maggie asks, individuals often fall on extremes of the communication spectrum. Some are overly direct, potentially shutting others down, while others are so indirect that their input isn't fully understood. What are some strategies to balance these communication styles differences so that both are effective and contribute? Great question, Maggie.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question. I think there's such a spectrum of communication styles, right? So it sort of starts with like understanding your own and understanding those of the people around you, and then how you can like maybe shift the balance there to create space so that everyone does have space, right? Because I think there's always someone, and I have been this person in the past, who has no problem sharing. And so I might take up more than my fair share of the space on a subject. So being aware of that myself and recognizing that, and not having to contribute all of my ideas maybe in that moment, and making sure that somebody else that might be a little bit more shy has the space to do that. And that might not be in a group setting too, right? Like maybe someone's not comfortable in a group setting contributing their opinion, but you can check in with them right after that meeting and say, hey, I just want to see like what you thought about that. And maybe they need some time to process. and think about it too. Like we can come back tomorrow, but I do want to make sure that your opinion is, being brought to the forefront of this project or process or discussion or whatever the topic is, and being part of what's driving us forward, right? And
Yeah.
there's a lot of different opinions on how we should do things and why we should do things or what we should do. It's not always easy to find a middle ground, and that might not always be necessary, but you can't even try to do that if you don't have everyone's input. And everyone's input is going to help you see blind spots. So you don't want to make choices or make decisions or try to change a process that's going to actually now add a step to someone else's team
Mm-hmm.
without being aware of that. So I think it's really like understanding yourself and finding out how to understand everyone around you too.
Absolutely. I loved it. It's very clear that your approach is very personal, and we're dealing with human beings. Even it's a job, and sometimes we lose sight of that just in like the to-do list, and like we're all headed in a certain direction. We have goals, and it's busy, and but to take the time to really, you said it really well, to really understand. First, to understand yourself, but understand your teammates as well is equally as important. I remember one thing that was very meaningful that we did on a team that I was on was to have each person take a personality test, and we each made our own a slide, of our results. And with that, we talked about our learning styles, our personality traits, things that contributed to the way that we respond to people, things that contribute to the way that we work in a particular way. What are the best conditions for how I, do my best work and things like that. And it got to a really deep enough level, personal level, that I remembered those key things about my coworkers going forward. And I was able to then think back to that and say, oh, in this situation, I recognize why they're responding in this way, or I recognize that this person likes to think before they respond, and so they're now, they ask for that, but it's a safe space because we all know that about that person, and so we can respect that that's how they process and learn. And so that was just one example too from my experience of like just a meaningful way to like really get to the heart and the root of like individuals and what they bring to the team, and even highlight some of the things that they might struggle with, or that you wouldn't know, right, unless you ask, unless you really get to know and understand people in a meaningful way. So I
That's such a
appreciate
great
you
example.
highlighting that.
Yeah. And those tests are wonderful because they tell you something about yourself as well as your teammates, right?
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
learning,
I learned about myself in that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Um, okay, we have another question. How do you get over the fear of sharing work when you have a leader on your team take away any creative autonomy and makes those creative decisions for you? That's hard.
That is a hard one. Yeah. I think in creative, it's especially hard because I think we pour so much of our passion into our work. And so then having, someone have a different vision or, sort of, you're almost like you're walking into those situations and sort of like expecting that feedback or those creative boundaries, right? But you want to figure out like how you can flex outside of them and like really show up with your ideas. And so I think that like honestly it really comes back to like again like the peopling side of things and like how do you make relationships and how do you make a relationship with that creative and maybe like have a one-on-one conversation and touch base about that and like bounce a few ideas like hey, here's some ideas that I want to try out, like help me understand like where I can grow and flex. Is there something I can test or try to showcase an idea? Yeah, I think it's really like identifying like with that person, like how you can really show up and flex your ideas. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that's challenging, right? Because you can only control yourself in this situation,
Yeah.
and you may not see everything that's under the umbrella of this other person and the team's purview, and so they may have some other reasons that things have to go a certain way. But I think starting that dialogue and like having those conversations and finding out like where can you expand? Where can you showcase your ideas? Where can you get them across the line? And maybe that, if you're like an ecom studio like I am, that might not be in your day-to-day work, but maybe your team can do like a test day, right? Maybe we have to follow this
Yeah.
all day, like very clearly on a day-to-day, but maybe we can have a test day so we can like flex our creative muscles and sort of like showcase our skill sets and really like build and expand those.
It's a great idea. Yeah, and I think what you said is so important. There's things that are in our control and there's things that are out of our control. I think it's so important to kind of recognize like perhaps there's still opportunity where we can influence change. And, I think this question highlights, a situation, an example of a situation that is not psychologically safe. And so that is hard when you're thinking about managing up, like you setting expectations of that leader, that doesn't feel right all the time. And so I think you're exactly right, Colleen. It's important to really recognize like what is in our control and influence versus like what isn't, and still try to be those change makers in our environment, in our teams. One other question I see here is what are some tips for fostering psychological safety as a manager, considering that people may feel like they can't be as honest with direct managers' leadership? This is a great segue question from the one that we just had.
Yeah, I wish this could be like packed into a sound bite because, man, if I had like a secret potion for this, I'd love to use that. I think you have to learn how to read people, and there is like that fear that I think we all sort of have to some extent about like how open can we be with our leaders and how do we communicate with them in a way that feels like very authentic to ourselves. Because there is that like slight fear level, right? Like you're being
Hmm.
evaluated by this person to some extent, but I think like developing like a partnership type of relationship, if you can, with your leader is um, worth its weight in gold for sure. And that really starts with like being vulnerable and like deciding what you can share and asking for feedback, And so I think um, it's a little bit of like trial and error and time invested in the relationship and being brave enough to also like ask for that feedback. Hey, how could we build a better relationship? Um, how can I share things with you? Or sometimes it's just like try it out and see how they respond. And this part of the answer I really hate saying, but some managers don't respond as
Hmm.
well as I wish that they would, So I have an example. I just joined my team recently, and one of my teammates said to me, like, hey, I'm really nervous to share this feedback with you, and then shared the feedback. And so
Mm.
that context was like really helpful for me, you know? And
Yeah.
plus, like, that gave me like a huge opportunity to say, thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you were like willing to put yourself out there and push through that fear and share this feedback with me. And now, like, we have so much more of an open way of communication with each other, right? Because we can both provide feedback to each other and like, hey, this thing maybe like didn't hit me right. I just want to like check in and see how you're feeling about XYZ. So I think it's a little bit of like you have to kind of push through the fear a little bit and test it out and then see how that goes. And if you can't create that with your direct manager, find someone else that you can.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful. It is scary. I think like hearing just at the opening of your session of you talking about like the fear of being vulnerable at work is particularly risky, and I think when you see yourself getting over that first kind of hurdle of taking that risk, speaking up, some of the questions here we don't have time to get to, but are around this exactly of just really how do you advocate for yourself and what you need when we are so kind of conditioned to just, want to adapt to the work environment that's, enforced on us, if you will. And so it does take a lot of courage. And I think I walk away today just hearing your story and some of the practical tips is empowerment for how to really take that first step to speak up for ourselves, to ask for what we need at work, and to ultimately hopefully build that bridge and connection and um, honesty with the manager or the teammates of the teams that we're on, so ultimately that they can understand you and they can support us in a meaningful way.